Hi, good morning, everybody. Our team is very happy to be here today to give you an overview of some of the key assessments in the School District of Philadelphia. We're really glad you could take the time to join us. My name is Jenny Hudeman Eideljorg, and I am a Director of Special Projects in the Office of Evaluation, Research, and Accountability, or ERA, as we call it. And I am joined by my colleagues, Mike Lowe, ERA's Deputy Chief of Accountability, and Jeff Robinson, Executive Director of our Assessment Office. As we go through the presentation today, I will try to keep an eye on the chat. So yes, please throw questions in there and we can either address them as we go or some of them we might save till the end if they're a little more in depth. And raise your hand if you've got a question. We don't have an overwhelming amount of people, so you can raise your hand if you got a question and we can probably take it in the moment too. On our agenda today, we're first going to talk about how we use assessments in the School District of Philadelphia. Then we will move on to talking about STAR assessments, what they're all about. Then we'll do a real deep dive into the PSSA, or the Pennsylvania System of School Assessment. And then we should have plenty of time for questions and reviewing some additional resources if you'd like to learn more. So now I will hand it over to Jeff to tell you about assessments and SDP.
Thanks, Jenny. Good morning, everybody. So we have a number of different assessments in the district, and they serve different purposes. No one test can do everything that we need it to do. So we use assessments for a variety of purposes. So one is helping us to gather information for our teachers to help them plan their instruction and refine what they're doing in the classroom. We also need to track student growth to be able to see how they're progressing throughout the year. So there's certain assessments that are designed to measure growth. We want to screen students to identify who might benefit from specialized support. So there's certain specialized screeners that can identify students who might be either needing additional support or other additional services that would benefit from them. So we'll have specialized screeners. We are going to measure a student's progress. We want to be able to do it in a way that we can compare across schools or across the district. So while individual classroom teachers might be making their own tests, we also need the ability to be able to have something that we can compare that all students are doing. So we will have some assessments that allow us to do that. We want to be able to identify and address educational disparities. So if we see certain groups or subgroups are struggling in certain areas or certain skills, we want to be able to address that. And then we're required to give tests by both the state and federal governments. Most of the tests that we administer in the district, we are administering because they're required by the state and federal government. They also serve these other purposes I talk about, but most of what we're doing is required. So that's why we are doing the different assessments. So I'm going to break this down a little further and talk about types of assessments, just to kind of broad categories. So there's a category of assessments known as universal screeners, benchmarks, diagnostics, progress monitoring. So we kind of lump these together. They definitely have some different purposes, but in general, these are tests that we are administering to help check progress and track student growth across the year. So a universal screener, universal means it's given to all students. And those are typically little shorter assessments that are designed to kind of take the temperature, see how everyone's doing, see if there's students who hopefully all students are healthy in this analogy with the taking the temperature. If we see some students who may be showing signs of illness or sickness or whatever, we can address that through intervention programs. So the screener is designed to be able to kind of get that quick snapshot, and we'll do that multiple times throughout the years. Typically, fall, winter, spring is when we do that to take those checks with the screeners. And that's giving the teachers important information about what students have mastered so far and where they might need additional support. If there are students who need additional support, that's where that progress monitoring piece comes in, and that screener is kind of given again at additional times between the fall, winter, and spring to see if the intervention programs that the schools are doing are working and helping the students make growth. So that's the general type of universal screeners, benchmarks, progress monitoring. Some examples of those tests would be the STAR assessments or some of our adaptives. So Freckle and Leo were certain examples of these types of tests. Your students might be taking iReady, things like that. Those are all examples of screeners. Another broad category would be state standardized tests. So this is going to be your typically your PSSA, your Keystones. These are annual standardized tests that measure what students across the state of Pennsylvania are learning, and they help ensure that all schools are providing quality education. So for the PSSA, that's administered once a year in the spring to all students in grades 3 through 8. We'll talk a little bit more about PSSA in a little bit. High school students are typically going to be taking the Keystone exams. So the Keystone exams are aligned to courses. They're aligned to Algebra 1, Biology, and Literature, which in our district we tie to the English 2 course. And students are demonstrating their knowledge on these tests, and they also can meet a graduation requirement through their performance on Keystones. There's other ways to make that graduation requirement, but passing the Keystones is one of them. So these are annual standardized tests that they're summative in nature. So it's basically summative, meaning they're looking at everything you were supposed to have learned over the course of the year for your particular grade or your course, and testing on that information. Another category would be specialized screeners. So specialized screeners, examples of this could be like the Naglieri or the WIDA screener for English learners. These specialized screeners identify students who might benefit from additional resources or different learning approaches. For example, that Naglieri, it's a nonverbal ability test, which is using pictorial directions, and there's no written part, there's no language part. And it is a screener that is one piece of evidence that we use in evaluating students for gifted education. Because it's nonverbal, it also helps to identify students who might be stronger nonverbal learners, which is great information for teachers to know. They might have students who maybe they've been struggling in class, and then they administer the Naglieri and realize, this student is going to benefit more from nonverbal, and they can incorporate that into their instruction. So specialized screeners are another type. And then the last category we'll talk about are informational assessments. So this one is the kindergarten early inventory is the main one we have right now in the district for this. So the KEI is something that teachers use to gather information about their incoming kindergartners in the first weeks of school. So these are generally, they're students who may have gone to preschool, they may not. So really important now that they're in the public education system, that we get some initial information about what those students can do. Teachers have a checklist, and this is not typically a formal test where they're sitting down and reading questions and answering A, B, C, D. There are parts that are this, but a lot of this test is also observational. They're watching students when they're interacting with other kids, whether in the classroom, on the playground. So they're looking at not just their intellectual skills, but also social, emotional, and some physical things. So the kindergarten inventory is pretty comprehensive and is done in those first couple weeks to really give information to not only the teacher, but the school, the district, for being able to see what is the student coming in with pre-knowledge, and what abilities do they have, and do we need to put in additional programs or supports or things right away for certain students. So those are informational assessments. So those are the broad types of assessments that we would do, and there's the multiple assessments that fit into those. We're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the STAR assessments, which is an example of one of those universal screeners, diagnostics, and progress monitoring tools. So I will hand this over to Mike Lowe, and Mike's going to talk a little bit about the STAR assessments for you.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Jeff, for explaining the landscape of assessment in our district and how we screen students for the assets that they bring to school and how we can support them as we go through the year. I'm going to specifically talk about the STAR assessment, which is one of the larger screeners that we use in the district. As Jeff said earlier, it's a universal screener, meaning that it's given to all students. And these are short tests that provide teachers with personalized learning data for each student. What's nice about the STAR assessment is that it's computer adaptive, which means it adjusts in difficulty to each answer that the student provides. This helps students get the best data and where to help students using the shortest amount of time of testing. So what that means is if a student answers a question correctly, the next question might be a little more difficult. If the student answers the question incorrectly, it may go back and look at an underlying prerequisite skill. And this helps dial in the skills that students are bringing to school and which ones they are not ready for yet. The STAR assessment measures students' early literacy in grades K to 2, reading and math ability in grades 3 through 12, and it provides the teachers with which information the student already knows and which skills they're ready to learn next. So how do we use STAR data? Teachers and school leaders use STAR data to individualize instruction by identifying students who need an intervention or an enrichment on specific skills. That computer adaptive piece allows reporting at that level so that teachers can measure student growth over time to make sure that they're making more than a year's worth of growth. We can monitor if they're doing less than a year's worth of growth or they're making the just right amount of progress. Obviously, when students start out behind grade level, we would want them to make more growth than usual so that they can catch up. Just like running a marathon, it's a long race, and some runners that are in the back of the pack need to run a little harder to stay with the pack or to move ahead. District leaders use STAR to monitor our progress towards the Board of Education's goals and guardrails. During the school year, the annual PSSA results are available. Before the PSSA results are available, we can use the STAR data to answer the question based on our screening in the fall, winter, and spring. How do we predict students will perform in the PSSA and Keystones in the spring? STAR results are reported in 4 different categories, and these provide a set of norms for national norms for where students are performing relative to other students, their age, their same grade, and their same performance level. So the at or above benchmark means that your student is meeting or exceeding the grade level expectation, demonstrating a solid understanding of skills, and requires less immediate support. The next level is on watch, indicating that the child may be slightly below grade level expectations and may need some extra help to strengthen specific concepts. Students that are on watch may or may not be proficient in the PSSA, but with support, we can ensure that they have a better chance of performing at or above the benchmark. Strategic intervention means that the student is significantly struggling with grade level material and needs targeted, specialized instruction in problem areas, which the STAR report can give a teacher those areas so that they can focus in small group instruction or maybe applying for an online adaptive program. The last category is intensive intervention, and this means that a student needs immediate, intensive support to prevent them from falling farther behind their peers. You can find your child's STAR results by logging in to the parent and guardian portal. We also encourage schools to provide parents with STAR reports, usually during report card conferences throughout the year. Next, we're going to talk about the PSSA. As Jeff said earlier, There are assessments that we are required to administer both by federal and state guidelines. The PSSA and Keystone are those exams.
Do we want to see if there's any questions on STAR
Sure, we can do that.
first? Before we jump into PSSA, don't want to put anybody in the spot, but if there are any questions about what we've covered so far, either come off a mute or if you want to throw in the chat, and we'll certainly have time for questions at the end as well.
Also, if you want to put the grade level of your child or children in the chat, we can also make sure that we're specifically addressing the assessments as they are administered to your child.
Okay. Horace, we see your hand up. Please go for it.
Hey, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Renee.
I don't really get to look at the STAR. I get to look at the PSSA. Now, you identified children, from all the way down to intervention, right? Right.
Correct.
Intensive intervention. Now, it used to be at one time when they came up with the PSSAs that they used to identify a whole school needing internal intervention. Now, when I look at the numbers, and that's the only number because I'm not a parent, I'm just a community activist. And when I see a school saying 28 out of 169 is proficient in math, or another school saying 68 out of 231 proficient in math. And then you tell us you have a bunch of screeners. What do you do when you have numbers like that in schools? Those are just two small schools. But then you have schools that have maybe 500 or 600 children in there. I mean, not 500 or 600, but might have 800 children in there. And then from your third to eighth grade, you're getting numbers like 100 out of 400 and something are proficient. What is the role of a screener when you have such large numbers in these schools?
That's a great question, Mr. Clouden. So a screener, like we said earlier, is an efficient, quick assessment. So generally, the online adaptive piece that students take about 30 minutes. Other screeners that we use, especially in the lower grades, take a minute to adapt. And the reason they're beneficial, they can give us a quick snapshot of a class or a group of children without encroaching on instruction. If we had to, and as you said, if you have a school that's got 28% of students that are proficient and 70% that are not, giving a what we call a diagnostic test, which would test every skill, would be so time consuming that giving 70% of the children individual assessments would then take the time that we're supposed to be instructing to assess. And we know that the only way to change these results isn't through assessment, but through good tier 1 instruction. So as we use the results from these screeners, teachers can get a quick assessment, a quick diagnosis, if you will, of the skills that they need to hit the hardest because most of their students in the class need it. Those 28% that are unproficient, the screener also tells the teacher, hey, this student would benefit by doing this skill or providing them this enrichment in order to keep them progressing. Meanwhile, the 70% of your students who are not progressing, you need to hit A, B, and C to get them where they need to be.
Any other questions on STAR specifically, or the things we've covered before we move into PSSA? Okay.
Okay, we're going to move on with PSSA then. So the PSSA is an annual Pennsylvania system school assessment. It's a standards-based criterion referenced assessment that measures student and school performance related to the attainment of proficiency of academic standards. So it is aligned to the Pennsylvania academic standards, which are also sometimes referred to as the PA Core, PA Steel standards, and because they're aligned to those, they are a criterion referenced assessment. The results give families, teachers, school leaders, and district leaders and the community a clear picture of how students and schools are performing in core subjects, ELA, math, and science at one point in time. So who takes the PSSA? In Pennsylvania, grades 3 through 8 take the PSSA in the spring, in April of each year. English language arts and math are administered in grades 3 through 8. Science is administered in grades 5 and 8. And the Keystone is administered in Algebra 1 at the end of Algebra 1 course, whenever a student takes it, whether that's 8th, 9th, or 10th grade. The end of biology, and at the end of English language arts, English 1, right? Or English 2?
English 2. Yep.
English 2. How do we use the PSSA? Teachers and school leaders use PSSA results to determine students' strengths and weaknesses compared to the curriculum and to make curricular choices and modifications to improve instruction. District leaders use PSSA data to support curriculum and instruction planning and improvement and identify if there are achievement gaps for different demographic groups. The Board of Education uses the PSSA results to track our progress on achieving the board goals and guardrails, which set annual targets for reading and math achievement. Jenny?
Yes. We also use the PSSA in the school selection process. So the PSSA is used as one criterion for admission to criteria-based schools in the annual school selection process. If you're not familiar, criteria-based schools admit students through an annual lottery process, but in order to be entered into the lottery at a criteria-based school, students have to meet certain criteria or requirements. This includes having a minimum PSSA percentile, grade and attendance requirements, and sometimes additional criteria like an audition or a presentation. The PSSA is the assessment that we use for the assessment requirement. Students' 2 most recent years of PSSA scores are considered, and between those 2 years, students must meet certain criteria in both ELA and math, or for some schools in just ELA or math. So you can see in the chart above in the section circled by the yellow rectangle that, some schools require 80th percentile in both ELA and math. Then there's some schools that require 65th, some schools that require 50th in both ELA and math. And then there are some criteria-based schools that require just 50th percentile in ELA or math. So that means your child would qualify with their assessment scores if they scored at least 50th percentile in 1 year of the past 2 years in ELA or math. You can learn more about the school selection process and find the PSSA percentile conversion charts at schoolselect.philasd.org, the website listed at the top. And now I will pass it back to Jeff to talk about this year's PSSAs.
Sure. Thanks, Jenny. Mr. Clouden, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, if you could go back to the last slide and just explain, just take one of those 80, 65 or whatever. Just explain, are they passing the test, or I just don't understand that part of it.
Oh, how that aligns to the actual proficiency levels or the scale score. I'm going to describe this, but Jeff, please interrupt if I'm saying anything not quite precisely. Basically, all of Philadelphia students' PSSA scores for that year are kind of like put in a pot, and the percentiles come out of that. So if you scored if you scored as high as the 80th percentile of all students in Philadelphia, then you meet the 80th percentile. So it's not related to the precise proficiency level. it's about what percentile you are out of all the kids in Philadelphia.
But basically, you have to pass the PSSA. Is that correct, though?
No, like the 50th percentile is typically it's in the, I feel like it's usually in the basic or below basic
Oh, okay.
level,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
usually in basic.
And you can find, like, if you go look at the conversion charts online, you can see the actual scale score that aligns to the percentiles. And um yeah, I feel like, typically students in the 80th percentile are high proficient or advanced, and then the 65th is more proficient and even probably some basic, depending on the year and the subject.
Right. So
Okay.
these two would
So each
mostly
of
be
your criteria-based schools, as qualifiers would say we accept 50% percentile. And what's different is, okay, you have basically five top high schools, and I'm sure with the Mastermans, the Columbos, and engineering science, they probably wouldn't accept anybody that's in the 50 percentile.
Mm.
Is that correct, or would that be wrong?
Correct.
That's
Right.
correct.
You have to be at the 80th percentile
Got you.
in both
Okay.
ELA and math
Okay.
to
Mhm.
be entered into the lottery at Masterman or Central.
Okay. Thank you.
There's no exceptions to that.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for that.
I want to continue a little bit with PSSA. So one of the changes, so the PSSA has been around for a long time in Pennsylvania. This year, a change that's being made is the test is going to be administered online only instead of on a paper format. There are a couple exceptions for students with IEPs who can still have paper, students who need large print or braille, for instance. But otherwise, most students are taking it online. The content of the test isn't changing. Some of the questions are slightly different formats. We'll talk about that on the next slide. Even though this is the first year that it's mandated that the PSSA is online, our students in our district have been taking online tests for years. The STAR test that we talked about is 100% online. The students taking Access is online. A lot of our interventions are online. So we've had some schools who've been doing online PSSA in previous years. So it's not new for our students to be taking tests on the computer. But we do want to make sure that all of our students have had a chance to practice with the online platform before they take the PSSA, so that they are not going to have trouble with the tools for the test. So we're actually going to show you a little bit about how to practice that, the online, how our schools are practicing it with students, and how you also can practice at home if you want with your students. So we'll get to that in a second. I just want to focus a little bit on the new item types that are on the online tests. These are something called technology enhanced items. So in a traditional standardized test like this, most students are used to, and most adults are used to, having questions with 4 answer choices: A, B, C, or D, and students pick one of those. And a technology enhanced item is asking the students to respond to the item, not just by picking A, B, C, or D, but somehow interacting with that item. And that could look very different depending upon the grade level and the subject. So for instance, it could be something like in ELA tests, the students might have to insert punctuation marks into text. They might be reading some sentences, and then there's a blank in the middle of the sentence where they click and they have a drop down menu, and they have to pick which word from the 3 or 4 words listed best fills that blank, which is most appropriate for that. In math, it could be asking them to plot points on a graph, or for 3rd graders, maybe they might have to move hands on a clock to show 9:15. So it's not asking them to have any new knowledge than they were tested on before, but it's just asking them to demonstrate the knowledge in a little bit of a different way, because they have to interact with those items. So when we're going to show you where you can look at these different technology enhanced items if you're interested in learning more. So we'll look at these now. So the state has some training sites that are open to everybody in the public, in the schools. They're available 24/7. All you need is an internet connection to get to them. We're going to show you a little bit about what these tools are, and know that we have been communicating with schools since the fall about these tools. And pretty much every month we're hitting again, stressing that they should be using them and making sure that they know how to use them. So there's two types of tools that are available. One are these things called online tutorials, and then there's the online tools training. So the tutorials are short little videos that range anywhere from like 30 seconds to 2 minutes. And they are a video that demonstrates how to use every different tool and feature of the online test. So how do you submit an answer on the online test? How do you go back and check previous answers? How do you use a calculator? How do you how can you use a highlighting tool if you're used to highlighting as a reading strategy as you're going through? So various tools. So these little videos to make sure these students know how to use these tools. And then the online tools training actually lets the students go into a to simulate basically like a sandbox to play around with the tools. So they've seen the video, so they know how to use it, and they go into the tools training, and they can use an interactive system to be able to actually use the tools themselves. So let me show you these real quick, and give you a, so I'm gonna exit out of this presentation here for a minute. And I'm going to go to this website here. These do work better on the Google Chrome browser. So if you put that website into your web address browser and it doesn't work, it gives you an error message. I would try using Google Chrome. When you go into that web address, you're brought to this screen here, and this is where you're going to want to go into the Insight training. So the tutorials, you pick the test. So we're going to look at PSSA, and then you pick your subject. So we'll look at math. And then every one of these little white bubbles would link me to a video. And so how do I, if I'm a student with an IEP and there's certain accommodations, how do I use the accommodations? How do I submit my test for scoring? How do I sign into the test? Things like that. But then every one of these would be an example of one of those technology enhanced items we talked about. The numbers in front apply to the grades that the grade level that the technology enhanced item might be on their test. So for instance, the drawing hands on a clock, only 3rd and 4th graders would see that. And plotting numbers on a line would go from 3 to 6, right? Only 7th and 8th graders using graphing tools, things like that. So each one of these videos would show the students, here's a sample item that requires you to drag and drop something. Here's how you do that on the online test. So I'm not going to show these videos right now because the audio won't come through and you'll just be watching something on the screen, but you can get to this yourself. You don't need any login to get there. So we are encouraging schools to go through all of these videos with the students. And then they also can do, let me go back to that tools training here. So the tutorials are the videos, but the online tools training, and we'll stick with math since we were just looking at that. This simulates exactly what the online test would look like for students. So this is what they would see after they put in their username and password. I'm going to skip through some of this. This is just going to be some disclaimer stuff and then some directions. But then the students get to be in the actual portal of what the test would look like. So this is what the online PSSA is going to have. They're going to have this toolbar with different tools. They're going to be able to select answers and move on. They can get to a help menu that tells them how to use all these different tools. So I'm not going to click on every little thing, but I can use a highlighter if I want to be able to highlighting certain things. There's a way to strike out answer choices if if there's answers that I want to eliminate, things like that. So I just want to try to get to one of those technology enhanced items too. But you can see as I'm going through, this allows the student to practice with all of the tools. These are not scored tests. If a student takes it multiple times, they'll see the same items every single time, because the purpose of this is not to prepare them instructionally, it's to prepare them to use the tools. They're getting prepared for instruction through classroom teaching. This is a chance to just make sure they know how to use the online platform. So you can see here, let's just see, let me get to this is an open-ended item. So on math, they might have to put in an equation. So they have this little equation builder where they can, enter fractions and square roots and all sorts of different things. So they can practice with that. These are all other open-ended items that the students have to put in answers. So here's one where the students would have to, put points on a graph. So this would be an example of a technology enhanced item where they are not just picking A, B, C, or D, but they have to somehow interact with the item. So I don't want to spend too much time on going through all of the different versions of these, but you can see here that this is available for both PSSA and Keystone, and it's available for all grades and subjects. So we are highly recommending that schools practice this with students. And like I said, this is something where you can use this web address and you can access it at home. You can access it 24/7 if you want to be able to go through any of this with your students yourself. I will also tell you that the students, their district Chromebook, they have the ability to get to this on their own Chromebooks. If they don't log into their Chromebook, on the bottom left-hand part of the screen for their Chromebook, it'll say apps. If they click on apps, they'll pick the DRC Insight Training app, and it will bring them right to that screen that we were just looking at where they can get into the tutorials. They can also use the web address, but we try to encourage the students to use their Chromebooks because that's what they'll be using for the actual PSSA or Keystone tests. Mr. Clouden, I saw your hand up when I was talking about the practice. Do you have a question about these practice tools or the online test?
Yeah, so basically this is going to be the first year that the student's going to see this in this type of format, this online testing.
For most of our students, this is the first time they'll take the PSSA online, correct?
Right. And so before you take the PSSAs, you usually take 2 STAR tests.
Correct.
Now, is the STAR test going to be formatted the same way as the PSSAs
The
on the
STAR
online?
test, it is an online test. It's not exactly the same, but it is very similar.
Okay, so in other words, if they're fluent in the STAR application, it won't help them in the PSSA application.
It will help them to have been taking tests online with STAR. Absolutely, they're used to reading things on the screen. But we want to make sure that any little differences between those platforms that the students have a chance to practice, which is why we've been promoting these tools heavily, so that when they get to the PSSA, they have had multiple chance to practice with the actual PSA system so that it's not new to them.
Now,
so there is something you might have seen it on the screen as Jeff was clicking through. There is a mock PSSA that is available only in the school environment called Firefly. A majority of our schools have given that test. It is basically a mock-up of the PSSA, same types of questions, same type of interface. It is the DRC Insight platform. While we're not requiring it of every school, most schools have gone on and done them. So most of our children have seen what this test will look like prior to April when they take the PSSA.
okay, now you just said something interesting when you said it's not required. How is things not required when everybody's going to be exposed to this?
So we are requiring schools to do these trainings, the online tools training, the online tutorials. We're not requiring them to do the Firefly test. The Firefly test is a similar purpose to the STAR. It gives the same type of information. Some schools are choosing to use it to give students extra practice using these online tools. But we want schools to have that choice because there's, we don't want to just keep doing more and more testing and not teaching students, because teaching students is going to help them to do the best on the PSSA. We are requiring that they practice with these tools, but this is a different thing than taking another test. Sitting down and spending another 45 minutes or an hour to take another test. These are much more focused on, do you know how to use the tools? And that's what we are requiring all schools to do.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. So,
Jeff, hold on before you move on.
Sure.
There's a question from Jonathan in the chat about preparing for the PSSA, not in terms of, not in terms of what the online test looks like, but in terms of the content. Are there, do we recommend, or are there resources for preparing for the PSSA in terms of curriculum, instruction, content, et cetera?
Sure. Jonathan, do you want to add to that, or do you want to just answer? I saw you came off mute. I want to give you a chance to, if there's, just want to answer the question.
Yeah. Just as in, as you said, that kind of accommodates or acclimates the kids to the process of taking the test, what they're going to see, how to use the drop downs. I'm just wondering if there's more of kind of like a content of the test practice, as in practice questions. You download a test and you can practice, and all the questions are different. You download another one, different questions again, just of kind of like content kind of repetition practice.
Sure. Yep. So the PSSA is a state test, and so we're at the mercy of what they provide in terms of being able to have like practice PSSAs. They do not have the ability to practice a full length PSSA, where, like you said, if you do it multiple times, you get different questions. So the state does not provide that. What the state provides is two things. One, that online tools training we were just looking at, those are previously used PSSA and Keystone items. So even though those tools training that we were looking at, even though it's not scored when the students are in there, the items they're seeing are PSSA items. The other thing I would say is the state does have some released items that they have on their website. It's a little bit challenging to get to. This is recorded, so we'll be able to have that. But if you go on the state website, which is pa.gov, and you go to programs and services, instruction, elementary and secondary education, and then scroll down to assessments, you can then pick PSSA, and then within PSSA, there's these resource materials. So if I go look at math, they have these item samplers from many, many years. And these have generally somewhere between 15 to 20 items that would not only be, so they make sure they have different types of items. And then there's answer keys. And for the open-ended items, they also have sample student responses saying, okay, if a student answered this way, they would earn the maximum score on this item. For students, so if it's out of 4 points, this is a response that would be a 4. This is a response that would be a 3. This is a response that would be a 2. So these can be helpful sources of, this is all the state provides really in terms of those practice items there. They don't have otherwise practice tests. So I would say these samplers and the online tools training are the best source. But I also want to just encourage that the PSSA is aligned to the Pennsylvania standards, and our curriculum is aligned to the Pennsylvania standards. The whole purpose of the curriculum is to be teaching the students for these. I do know that built into the curriculum, they also have sample. They are purposely building in resources. They put in like sample PSSA items. So like some of these, they incorporate into the curriculum. So it shouldn't be something that students are not familiar with the types of questions on the PSSA. That should be something that is being, kind of reinforced throughout the year. But specifically to your question, here's where you could find some practice sample items.
Great, thank you.
Yep. And again, I know that was tough to get to. We went to pa.gov, programs and services, instruction, elementary and secondary ed, scrolled down to assessment, and then clicked on PSSA, went to resource materials, and that's where we found them.
I did put the PSSA landing page in the chat,
Cool.
which is also an incredibly long URL, but if you want to bookmark that for yourself for the future.
If you are interested in a deeper dives on PSSA, what's covered on those tests, you can go a little bit more into here, and you can really go in depth on what's covered in each test if you want. But I know that not everybody will want to see that. All right, I got 5 minutes, so I want to speed up a little bit here. Some general test taking tips that were always good to do before in any test, but certainly PSSA as well. And these are things that, again, I start now. Students coming to school on time every day. The best way to prepare for these tests is instruction. If students are in school, they're going to be better on these tests than students who don't come to school. That's a pretty obvious statement, but it's true. So making sure kids are at school on time, they're getting good sleep, they're eating healthy breakfasts, or taking advantage of the meals in schools if they're not able to have that breakfast at home, or if they're not hungry yet in the morning. Listening closely to instructions. This is key for for these tests, is making sure they pay attention to what they're being asked to do on these tests, that they're following the directions from their teachers. We always encourage the kids, especially on the PSSA, they should answer every single item. If they don't know, they should guess. They don't get a penalty, a guessing penalty, so don't leave anything blank. So that's something that we try to stress as well. And then obviously they should be checking their work before they submit it, make sure they didn't skip anything. For those open-ended items, those open-ended items are really important, that the students are making sure that they are doing their best and not just writing like a sentence, that if they're supposed to be writing about a reading passage, that they take their time, and those writing questions are weighted heavily on the test, so they make up a bigger portion of the score. So it's important that students are trying on those open-ended items and not leaving those blank either, as well as the multiple choice ones. With the PSSA, the results for the PSSA, the main way those results come are from performance levels, and there's 4 performance levels: advanced, proficient, basic, and below basic. So we were talking about these a little earlier. I think Ms. Clouden, you were asking earlier kind of what is basic and what is passing the test. So you can see advanced and proficient would be considered passing the test. Basic and below basic would be considered not passing the test. And then you can read a little bit more about specifically what they are. But I don't want to dwell too much on there just for time. You can find PSSA results both on the parent portal in the district, by going into the parent portal, picking on SchoolNet, and then standardized test results. Schools also get 2 paper copies of PSSA results. They come in the fall each year. They're supposed to send one home, and they also are supposed to keep one on record. So they get 2 copies for each student. So if you have not seen previous year's PSSA scores, you can try either of these options, and then know from this year's PSSA, those results will be available in the fall. And then we just wanted to make sure you're aware of, we covered 2 of our assessments in depth, but there are other ones. If you want to know what tests are given, when they're given, and which grades take them, you can look at our assessment calendar on the district website. Go to philasd.org/ERA. And this assessment overview here, this document is, we go through each test and we go for what is it for, who does it take, and how do we use the data. So if you look at this calendar and you're like, okay, what is this access test? What does that mean? This overview document will help you. You can read, okay, well, who takes access? What's it for? Why do we do it? So when you look at these calendars, you'll see a lot of tests, but pay attention to which grades take them, which populations, because not every student takes every single test on that calendar. That calendar is for all of our students K-12. So we try to make it clear on there which grades take it, but these overview documents will help as well. All right, great. Apologize, I sped up a little bit there at the end. We are available to stay on for some questions if you have them.